My name is Tim, and with me today is founder and CEO Jason Kremins of Signagelive. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tim. Good to be here.
It's been 34 episodes. We finally got you on.
Good.
What do you want to talk about today?
I think probably one of the key things we could talk about in particular about the business is the current process we're going through in terms of the overall architecture of the platform and the data center migration.
Because we're moving from having kind of a dual data center set up with Rackspace and Amazon AWS, and we're transitioning fully to just AWS. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, absolutely.
And what was the driving factor behind that decision?
I think there's several, but I think the key one is that the Rackspace infrastructure was developed before, in fairness, the AWS capabilities were there today.
Mm-hmm.
And we've obviously, where we've possibly been able to, we've augmented the AWS capabilities with our existing Rackspace infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
But what we want to do is to move fully over to AWS because it gives us obviously all the capabilities that are baked in within that platform for scalability, redundancy. But equally, we want to be able to expand the platform into other territories.
And talking about other territories, there is already a body of work that's gone into that in terms of being prepared for spinning up versions in different regions.
Yeah, correct. So we've got some test regions already that we've launched,
Mm-hmm.
and they're working incredibly well. So in terms of the actual platform and the move towards AWS, we've already set up with moving the existing UK infrastructure over, and then the ability at this moment in time to have a further infrastructure that's developed in another country, and then to be able to expand that as needed.
So what was the reason for pushing forward into doing that? Is that something that's been driven by end user request or our partners' request? What kind of drove that decision?
I think it's been a combination of both. We've certainly seen that the nearer that we are to the projects in terms of actually the data and the infrastructure is certainly from a point of view of whether it's perception or actual is of benefit to our customers. But I think also what we're also seeing in the current geopolitical environment that we're in is that having the ability to host Signagelive and have data contained within a particular country and jurisdiction is becoming mandatory for a lot of organisations. It has been in certain sectors, obviously government sectors in the past, and in fairness, in certain countries, there's been very much a strong push from organisations to have a data sovereignty.
Yep.
But we're seeing that becoming more and more the case with the current political climate.
I know that this is somewhere we started off in Australia, and I think that was
Correct.
kind of driven by a request from one of the partners saying this is a requirement, and there are other regions we're looking at depending on which is the most critical. I know there's certain European countries which take that far more seriously than others.
Yep.
So I know that we've talked about internally the value of having everything on AWS because it gives us some of the unique tools that they have now built that gives us, from a development perspective, I know Mark, obviously our CTO, would be able to talk about this in more detail, but it gives them a little bit more, a stronger tool set to go and build for the future. Is that accurate? Is that kind of what the intention is?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's always been a case of the way we've seen it is we're in the process of moving house. So we're actually moving the house at this moment in time. And then once we've actually moved in, we can then look at actually leveraging some of the capabilities within AWS in terms of the application layer, so actually Signagelive itself. So there's both the DevOps, as they say, development operations, so the actual infrastructure that's running Signagelive, and then there's the work we do within Signagelive to actually make use of a lot of the toolkits that are available with AWS.
Yeah.
And a lot of that comes down to resilience, added layers of security, we're already incredibly secure with our ISO 27001, and a lot of things that AWS give us, we've already having to do in different ways using Rackspace, for example, but it's much easier and much more scalable within AWS.
I think it's important to note that a lot of the body of this work has already been done. It's been happening behind the scenes. It's not been kind of a universally, we're going to completely exchange what we have.
No.
And that's the other thing is we're not rewriting from the ground up what
No.
Signagelive is. So it's not like a concern in the way that Signagelive runs today. It's literally, say, like lifting it, moving it over to its new home and it kind of replumbing it back in.
Correct. Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of development that's been ongoing and some major pieces that obviously we had granular user permissions, which was a big release, not just from a functionality perspective, but the infrastructure that has to be built around that to make that possible. And then there's other elements to that we can maybe talk about on a later date that adds value to that. with this new transition over to AWS, are there any other kind of intangible benefits or things that people might see? Is it from an API development perspective? Is it the same? What does that story look like?
No, I think that will be enhanced because, again, it gives us the ability to tap into additional feature capabilities with AWS. And certainly as we start to look to explore further the move towards AI and agentic workflows within the platform, you've obviously got things like Amazon Bedrock, etc. So there's a whole suite and capability within AWS which allows us to kind of consider that within the same security posture, the same hosting environment, which is going to be important for all of our key customers, where they're reliant on us to make sure that whatever we do, we keep the platform secure and resilient and up and running.
I know we have several partners that use us as a headless service, basically taking what is, I had a good conversation with someone that explained it like a restaurant. So you go in and behind the scenes, you've got your chefs and they have all the ingredients, and that's the part of the API that Signagelive is. And then you'll have users that are taking pieces of Signagelive or whatever they require to build their own CMS platform or whatever that might be. So those were the people that would be benefiting from this, from having those additional tool sets that we could be able to give out to them to say, here's access to the same API, the infrastructure isn't changing, the code isn't changing, but being able to use certain tools within AWS to allow them more flexibility. Does that seem right?
I would say it will allow us to enhance our APIs with certain capabilities and maybe add additional APIs. I think anything that ultimately accesses our platform or our hosting environment would be through what we expose through the APIs. But yeah, definitely it gives us the ability to incorporate some of those new tools in. And I think one of the other big areas for us is obviously now that we're moving over, or will have moved over by the time this comes out, to AWS exclusively. And we've spun up, as you say, the data center down in Australia. The next stage is, how do we then kind of manage that at scale? So the next phase, and it's ongoing currently, is to build out what we call the admin center. So that within Signagelive provide really super administrators the ability at the point of creating a Signagelive network to determine which data center they want to be in. And they're data centers that we've established. Okay. Right. So we will ultimately make a commercial decision ultimately to put a data center Signagelive instance in a given country, and then that would then be available as an option for that customer to say, well, actually, we'd rather be on that server as opposed to this server. So
when they're spinning up the servers, they can just go, I want to be in Australia based. Obviously, the data is stored closer to home. So does that reduce things like latency and like uploads?
Yeah, inevitably. There's less hops. It's native within that country. So yeah, absolutely. And obviously, it's removing failure points as well.
Sure. Yeah. And also, you said like there's the backup system where there would be one instance in the UK as an example, but it doesn't mean it's with AWS. You could have multiple instances running in there for us from a backup perspective.
Correct.
And additional securities, and just leveraging that to be able to make sure that Signagelive's uptime is consistent and as high as possible.
Yeah, and I think that's the big benefit we have immediately moving to AWS that everyone inherits is that increased stability and resilience, because we're in effectively 3 different physical locations in the UK acting as one. So obviously if any one of those fail, the other 2's pick up. And the latency, speaking of Mark, those data centers for AWS are within 60 miles of each other, but on separate power grids and etc. So that the speed, the hop between each of those is negligible. You would never know. It's pretty seamless in that regards.
Interesting.
So it's a very robust environment that we can then host on. Our customers have got that added support there.
So that's, and as I said, by the time this video comes out, all of this is completed. I know we've done a huge body of the work already, so it's not that we're kind of recording this 6 months in the past and it finally gets released. We're pretty much there, right, in terms of the actual launching itself.
Yep.
Everybody's been communicated with, everybody knows what's going on, so it's more just a case now of just flicking the switch and making it available to everyone. And the experience itself doesn't change. Nope. It's exactly the same experience. There's no UI updates or changes to this. It's purely just how we're managing the platform and making it accessible.
Yeah, correct. And it will be that introduction of the admin center that would be the only thing that will be different as and when that is launched. I think the other thing to point out as well is this is not an immediate switch. So if you're in a country where we have a data center,
right,
it's very clear we need to point out there needs to be real consideration, and this will be a future consideration for any existing customers and where they're located and how we were to migrate them over, because it's not just the data that resides on the server, it's where the devices connect to and all those others. So there's a shared responsibility accountability between ourselves, the systems integrators and channel partners we work through, and the customers as to if and when we do that, assuming we have a data center in a given country that they want to migrate to. But we see that as a slightly longer term project, so that's something we probably wouldn't be in a position to discuss until probably 2026.
Sure. Well, that makes sense. Well, I think at least now we've got the opportunity to go, if we have a customer or a selection of customers, say, look, it's imperative that we need to have our data centers in this country. It's a discussion we can have and have an open discussion with, rather than being able to say, we can't do that. It's not possible.
Correct.
So great. No, perfect positioning. Anything else you wanted to cover around this, or does that kind of cover the why and the who and the what and the where?
I think it does. I think it's just really to kind of reassure customers that they're getting behind the scenes. Visibly, they won't see much, but behind the scenes, they're getting a far more performant, resilient, robust platform that's based on probably the leading infrastructure stack that's out there. And it's going to allow us to continue to invest and develop Signagelive in a way that was not possible previously when we were with Rackspace.
It's the bedding for future potential development.
Lots of plans, It just allows us to say, we've moved home, and now it gives us the ability to take stock, decide what do you want to do with the furniture, what do you want to do with the decoration, do we want to build an extension? So it's using that metaphor.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Jason, for coming on.
You're
Appreciate
welcome.
it. And we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks. Cheers.